Alright, so I was gonna do my usual post-game video of the Bulls-Timberwolves game last night. I tweeted last night that I wasn't gonna be doing a post-game video, but would have something out today. And while yes, I will speak to the game a little bit, I did want to focus this video on something that I actually think is becoming more than just a hot start to the season as the sample size gets bigger and bigger, and that's the play of Nikola Vucevic and what it means for the Bulls and how they position things as we get closer to the trade deadline. But then also discuss how this is happening. How is it that a player who played 3 seasons below expectations of what the Bulls expected of him when they made that trade back in 2021 to now, 4 years later, an older Vucevic who is now 34 years old, a player that the Bulls would have to beg to get someone to take off their roster this offseason, and somehow having one of the best seasons of his career. And that's not an exaggeration either, it really is. So let's talk about it further and what it means for Vucevic's potential trade value going into the deadline come February. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, in watching the Bulls game last night against the Wolves, the biggest thing that stood out to me is the continued improved play from Nikola Vucevic. Yes, the Bulls obviously collapsed in the fourth quarter. They ran out of gas on the second night of a back-to-back. Still no Lavine or Lonzo Ball, and they're going up against one of the better teams in the NBA. To be honest, aside from the fourth quarter, I actually thought the Bulls played well and liked the energy that they were showing despite playing the night before. Granted, that's why it's a whole 48-minute game. Doesn't really matter how great your energy and effort is if you take the last quarter off. But no, I do kind of give the Bulls a pass on that, given it was the second night of a back-to-back and they were playing a contending team. Also, like I mentioned at the beginning of the season, this is going to be a live or die by the 3 year. The Bulls were living and staying in front of the Wolves with how hot they were to start the game, where it seemed like they could not miss from behind the arc, to drastically cooling off in the second half. And of course, turnovers killed the Bulls. They took care of the ball early on and didn't have a single turnover in the first quarter, but then finished out the game with 13 from that point on. Also, like I mentioned in the last game against the Mavericks, teams have finally started figuring out the Bulls to just keep attacking the paint where the Bulls are at their worst when it comes to their interior defense. But let's step aside from the game last night for a minute and talk about Vucevic. Last night, another impressive game, especially going up against the Defensive Player of the Year, where he was putting him in the spin cycle, hitting him with the key moves to get easy buckets. Vucevic put up another 25 points on 11 for 15 from the floor, yet again continued to display his ability to shoot the 3 ball and went 3 for 5 from deep. Look, last season, Vucevic was one of the worst 3-point shooters in the league. That's not an exaggeration either. He was, I believe, 3rd worst in 3-point percentage for players who took over 200 threes last season, and was also dead last in 3-point shooting on wide open attempts. He finished out the year shooting 29% from 3 on a little over 4 attempts per game. So far this season, and again, I know it's only been 9 games, I know that he's not going to be able to sustain this over time, and those numbers will come down a bit, but he's shooting 47.5% from 3 on higher volume than last season. But 3-point shooting aside, Vucevic has been insanely efficient around the basket. I mean, one of the biggest gripes I had about Vuce last year was that he couldn't finish simple shots around the hoop, smoking layups, doing these weird floaters that would clank off the rim. And of course, as you guys know, my biggest issue with Vuce last season was just how checked out he was. Completely disengaged, looked like he didn't want to be there, was frustrated every night, complaining to the refs, getting technicals, not getting back on defense. It was just a mess of a season last year for Vucevic. But this year, he's been much more calculated in the post. He's impacting the game with his passing, moving in the pick and roll much better, and back to being the stretch 5 the Bulls had thought they traded for from the Orlando Magic. You know, I tweeted this last night, and it was more of a joke than anything, but it did have some truth to it when I thought about it further. You know, people always talk about how DeMar was holding Patrick Williams back, which I think is preposterous, but maybe is it possible that DeMar was actually holding Vucevic back? Now, that shouldn't take anything away from all the great things DeMar did in his time with the Bulls, because he was the Bulls' best player, was a killer in the fourth quarter, and a true professional and mentor for the young guys, whereas Zach and Vuce were not. But it's pretty clear, in just the early going of the season as well as what we saw in the preseason, Vuce is thriving in this new offensive system that is fast-paced with a high degree of ball movement. He's getting much better looks in the paint, he's better able to operate in the pick and roll without the paint being clogged up, and he's getting better looks along the perimeter by playing off the ball when guys are driving to the basket and you have a more willing passer like Josh Giddey. So I guess the proper thing to say is not that it was DeMar holding Vucevic back, but more so the offensive system that was built around DeMar these past 3 seasons that was really limiting Vuce. And of course, a lot of that is no DeMar, and of course, the past few games, no Zach Lavine. Vuce is obviously going to be one of the Bulls' primary scorers, so naturally you're going to see those raw numbers go up. But to me, it's more about the efficiency and focus he's been playing on offense. It's like he somehow received a newfound sense of purpose on this team, even despite the fact that he doesn't at all fit the Bulls' long-term plans and more than likely is going to get traded by the deadline or this offseason. Vucevic's true shooting percentage, which is one of the better indicators to measure a player's overall efficiency, is 68.2% so far. Last season, he was 54%, and he's never been above 60 for his career. The numbers will come down a bit because it's only been 9 games into the season, but like I said before, the trend is there because Vuce and his game is much more conducive to this style of offensive play. No, the question I've been asking myself is, well, what does this mean for Vucevic's trade value? Because teams can now see, hey, in the right role, the right system, Vuce is actually still a very productive player and can impact winning. Like, despite the Bulls' poor record, he still has a positive box plus minus, the highest on the team, and the highest number of win shares. He's a double-double machine, even in his down seasons he still was, and now you have a player who somehow has found his shot and touch again, only 1 more year left on his contract after the season as well, so you're not committing long-term money to him. I'm not saying that Vuce is going to give the Bulls some kind of insane haul in the form of a trade, and to be honest, given the Bulls still don't have that much leverage in this situation, since teams are going to know the Bulls are trying to move Vucevic to embrace the youth movement, but the Bulls should, and I need to emphasize the should because AK hasn't really had a great track record for maximizing trade returns, but the Bulls should be able to get something for Vucevic in return, whereas it was more than likely they were going to have to give up assets just to get his contract off the books. And the team I keep coming back to, which now I feel like is even more so a reality than before, given how they start off the season, is the Golden State Warriors, a team that has been in desperate need of a starting center for years, even during the dynasty days, and a team that, based on how they started the season, have found a new sense of energy and competitiveness. They could make some big moves before the deadline to try to get them over the top and win one last championship. I still think they don't have a chance to win anything, but I'm sure they believe they do. And given they know that their window is limited with Steph still playing at a high level, they may try and buy low for a player like Vucevic, where they wouldn't have to give up as much rather than selling the farm like they were attempting to do and trading for Lauri Markkanen. The Suns, yes, could also be a possibility for a Vuce trade, as Vuce would be an upgrade over Nurkic. However, the Suns aren't going to have anything enticing enough for the Bulls where they don't have draft capital or have such few young players. The Warriors, on the other hand, though, they have some promising young players that could fit the Bulls youth movement or draft assets to work with for the future while also having the contracts to make the money work. Now, the Bulls aren't going to get a guy like Kuminga or Podziemski for Vucevic, but someone like Moses Moody, who the Warriors just extended, former lottery pick, still young, I have my doubts if he'll turn into much of anything, but still some upside. And then throwing in expiring contracts of Kevon Looney or Gary Payton, which frees up your books for the $20 million you owed Vucevic next season, and then maybe a second-round pick or two. I tweeted last night, is Vuce really about to give the Bulls a first-round pick? I don't think that's realistic. No team, unless they're extremely incompetent, would give up a first-round pick for a 34-year-old center who can't play defense, although, I don't know. If Vuce continues to keep up this level of play, where we don't see a regression to the mean, I don't know, maybe you could see the Bulls somehow getting a heavily protected first-round pick for Vucevic, maybe a lottery-protected pick. It's probably wishful thinking, but look, the point in all of this is, this has actually been the best-case scenario for the Bulls when it comes to Vucevic, because he's playing the best he's ever had since coming to Chicago. The Bulls are still losing, so they're in a position to keep their pick, and now, rather than selling off Vuce and Zach for parts, you can likely get something decent for them in return to truly and fully embrace the youth movement. We'll see if it lasts, whether Vuce can actually maintain this level of efficiency, and also how long the Bulls will hang on to him before biting on a potential trade offer. But I would love to hear what you guys think. Of course, let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.